I'm a millennial, born in 1993. As such, I wasn't exactly the target demographic for 1995's Neon Genesis Evangelion. I remember how I got introduced to the series, however. Around 1999, when the show released here in Brazil complete with a dub on the now defunct edgy cable channel Locomotion. I was 6 or 7 years old at the time, and my older cousin, for some unexplainable reason, thought it was a good idea to have me watch it with him, as it was airing during summer break from school, a period in which my parents would usually send me to spend time with the rest of my family. He was a pretty big fan at the time, and I watched a few episodes during my stay in his home that summer. Luckily, I only got to watch the first half of the anime. You know, the lighthearted, action-packed mecha kaiju stuff before it morphed into a deep existential crisis through unrelenting depression. I would probably have way more issues than I already did as a kid had the timing been different. Either way, I grew up to become an anime fan. And sometime around my tween years, anime exploded online, with fansubs bringing over all kinds of shows in extremely blurry compressions for the soon-to-be-called weebs to watch on our MVB player. I knew about Evangelion in broad strokes, of course. The jokes, the endless forum threads discussing the series and its themes, and the, in hindsight, incredibly bullshit explanations about how all of it was based on psychoanalysis, with each character representing something like ego, superego, the whole thing. But I had never actually watched it in full, so I decided to do just that. It grabbed me. Like, it seriously spoke to me on a very fundamental level, especially once the series began to get darker. While a lot of people love to complain about Shinji being whiny, I truly felt for the guy. He was my second favorite character, Kaoru being the first, and I loved his arc, the issues he had to grapple with, and I remember particularly falling in love with the aesthetic of the dreamy, surreal scenes towards the end, like that Twilight lit train and such. Then, naturally, I watched the end of Evangelion. If you're waiting for me to say that it broke me or something after this dramatic pause, I'm sorry to say that no, it didn't. It was fucking awesome! It took my favorite part of the series, the dreamy psychological scenes, and turned it all up to 11. Despite being generally dark and creepy, it really resonated with me, and I felt like the film just grabbed me by the collar through its 97-minute runtime and only let go at the final "The End" title card. I was simply mesmerized, even though I understood next to nothing upon my first viewing. Come on, I was 13. I was still way down the age one would expect for me to properly engage with all Evangelion was going for. It wasn't just the aesthetic that hooked me though. Something, somewhere deep in that pool of misery, blood, and exploring of psychological trauma had truly moved me somehow. I just couldn't really put my finger on it at the time. Well, time passed, I grew up, matured, and so did the general fanbase. The whole Freudian mumbo-jumbo analysis and snarky "Evangelion is only for smart people, mom" attitude were mostly gone or relegated to stubborn fringe groups. Evangelion could finally be seen for what it was, and communities of fans began to be able to more accurately break it down based on production information coming from supplementary material and interviews becoming more accessible than ever as the internet grew and evolved. Plus, that Sorta sequel PSP game came out and flat out elucidated a lot of the murky, only vaguely alluded lore that began to really fit all the pieces together. Nowadays, anyone with enough patience to sift through Eva Geeks or the Eva Wiki can find the necessary confirmations, summaries, and answers for all the questions the series mostly leaves implied. Upon further viewings, the original series and movie turn out to actually be impressively consistent and full of references and foreshadowing for all those murky plot details. And that is all the more impressive when you consider the very much troubled development history it went through. I mean, the movie only exists because the original series essentially ran out of time and money to actually produce its final 2 episodes as planned. Now anyone and their mother knows what the heck happens in End of Eva and what the series is about. It was around that time of a new clarification of Evangelion of sorts that I finally understood what exactly rubbed me the right way about the movie. While it certainly doesn't look like it, the end of Evangelion is actually a happy ending. At least in my opinion. The whole point of the plot and its many symbolisms was that interpersonal relationships were hard, messy, and fertile ground for deep-rooted trauma. As separate individuals who can't reach each other's minds, we are liable to get hurt when dealing with other people. We can be rejected, ignored, deceived, manipulated, and all sorts of terrible things can turn into long-standing suffering and depression. We've all been in that headspace at least once, I think, and Evangelion pulled no punches when deep diving into the deep depression that the human condition can offer. But Evangelion ultimately ended on a very hopeful note. Shinji has the option to either go through with human instrumentality or reject it. If he accepts it, the whole human species would morph into one single being. No longer shackled by the barriers of individuality, humans could become a single, blissful existence that would never hurt each other. There would be no more sadness or suffering, no more fear of opening yourself up to other people. Everything he has ever wanted would be achieved, and yet he chooses not to. Shinji comes to the conclusion that all strife and sorrow unique to being human is ultimately worth it, because of all the happiness you have a chance to achieve by opening yourself up to sadness. It's a truly beautiful thing. A world where instrumentality happens would be free of sorrow, but devoid of happiness. Shinji comes to the realization that taking his chances at happiness is better than running away from all the bad things that could happen. In a spectacular act of courage to reject his personal utopia in order to grow and experience the true happiness that can come from being human. It was a truly powerful message and finale to me, a reaffirmation of how humans can create something truly beautiful in midst of all the sorrow that comes from simply existing, to cherish the meaning we create for ourselves through our relationships against nihilism. Lilith even states that any human whose will is strong enough to imagine themselves being separate individuals again can regain their bodies, so it's really not all that doom and gloom despite the connotation of a massive extinction. To this day, I still find myself listening to Expansion of Blockade when I need a pick-me-up, or even Kamsu Sorta or Honeymoon and Anxiety when I just need to soak in the bad feels life brings. It was a message that brought me extreme joy and relief, one that I live by to this day and can only thank Hideaki Anno for representing it so well on screen. The end of Evangelion taught me that as long as hope exists, you can make anywhere paradise. The perfect finale. Nothing else needed to be done with the main series canon. Nope, nothing. You already know where this is going. The rebuilds were announced. I was interested. The first one came out in 2007, and at that time I was under the impression it was just a modern remake, which, hey, why not? The original animation certainly could benefit from a facelift, so I wasn't bored. Then, in the very first movie, was a little tidbit of divergent information that hinted at how much this was indeed a rebuild and not a remake. この星の生命の始まりでもあり、収束の要ともなる第二の使徒、リリスよ。So, now the characters were already aware way ahead of schedule of a particularly important plot twist. If you think I was let down by that due to this dramatic pause, you're wrong again. I was stoked! Shit, what an awesome idea! An alternate retelling of the old story. There's so much potential here, especially considering how the manga version generally improved the story for me by tweaking a few plot points here and there. Then I noticed the Red Sea and the marked moon and oh fuck, Kaoru at the end being all cryptic and oh shit, is that a time loop? Is the Evangelion universe being looped? I love time loops. Holy shit, is the manga canon as a loop? This is gonna be amazing. I can't wait for the rest of this stuff. 2.0 came along and I fucking loved it. I knew the next one would be radically different and I was counting on it. What kind of crazy retelling was coming up from the depths of Anno's mind, huh? Oh, this is gonna be amazing! And then 3.0 happened. Yeah, this pause is actually a bad one. I really didn't like 3.0. The way it handled Shinji's treatment post the so-called near-third impact was inexcusable for me. It felt like a kick in the balls to revert his previous development as a more courageous character like this. But the real problem was that the whole concept was just completely bizarre to me. After a 14-year time skip, the world is in shambles and a resistance group somehow built a giant whale airship in order to fight the now antagonized Nerve. That's comprised of a total of 3 people and a handful of clones that somehow could also build an entirely automated base despite the end of the world. Ugh. I mean, I have other problems with how the plot itself plays out, but this would just quickly evolve into a rant, and that's not the point of this video. The point is, I didn't like it. The story became a wild mess of old and new terminology that stretched whatever canon lore there is and nonsensical behavior from pretty much all of the characters. I was really disappointed by it, and I honestly doubted the sequel could somehow stick the landing after this. Well, 9 years later, There, it finally happened. On August 13th, the last Rebuild movie was made available outside Japan on Amazon Prime. It is now the 14th, and I literally just watched it like 5 hours ago as I write this. It may be too little time to properly let it simmer on my mind, and 1 or 2 more viewings may be needed for me to properly digest this information, but the movie immediately struck a chord with me, and I just need to let it all out on the script. Did it live up to the hype? Did I like it? The answer for both these questions is sorta. As an ending to an entire franchise that started out, 26 years ago now? Jesus Christ. It's one hell of a bold finale that manages to work despite all the wonky new elements this continuity keeps producing up to the very end. It has a ton of interesting stuff in it. I loved all the callbacks and references and how the story eventually sets into what it wants to say, especially in its first, more toned down act. Sure, the troubled production of this tetralogy is also all over the place. This movie is so stuffed with new information that I honestly think there's an entire middle movie missing from this series. The technobabble is so fast and loose that the whole thing becomes confusing magic by the time its final act rolls, and we're presented to the anti-universe, Black Lilith, a third lance, quantum superposition Eva that somehow 4max in one, an additional impact. Gendo now has a crucifix on his face, whatever the fuck this is, in Lilith Ray's awful 3D modeled head that's way more creepy and unsettling than the original, but for all the wrong reasons. Also, not a big fan of the animation in the fight scenes. The 3D is pretty jarring and the camera is just going all over the place to the point that I can't even understand what's going on amidst the explosions. Also, can I just say Mari is an absolutely pointless character? Through the whole tetralogy, she gets no arc or development at all. She's just there. But that's still not the real point of this video. All of the flair and insane new plot points exist mostly to set up the following scenario. After one of the best sequences in the whole franchise exploring the character of Gendo in more detail, Shinji is again in charge of the new additional impact, which essentially allows him to completely rewrite reality as he sees fit. Having now grown from his previous experiences in the continuity, Shinji begins by addressing the happiness of everyone he cherishes. He saves Asuka so she can be a part of the new world he's about to create. He finally frees Kaoru from his self-imposed quest to bring him happiness, and eventually decides this new world should be free of Evas to allow the original Rei to live the happy, peaceful life one version of her got to experience at the beginning of the movie. After a bit of more convoluted stuff, and an amazing Mantis scene reminiscent of the style from the end of Evangelion, he gets to move on to this new world himself, together with Mari. In a frankly amazing final shot, Shinji, a 14-year-old boy ever since 1995, is shown as an adult, and he goes on to enjoy the new world he created on this beautifully rotoscoped shot. And that's the end of Evangelion. So why do I sort of reject it, you ask? This new take on Evangelion has a drastically different message than its predecessor. It posits that one shouldn't love expecting love in return. You should simply love your loved ones because you do, and you think they deserve it. Shinji doesn't think of himself in this new ending. He thinks of all the people he cherishes and how he can do right by them. Thrice Upon a Time argues that you can only find your own happiness through your love of others. By loving each other, we can make the world a better place. We should not be shackled by our past and instead focus on building the best future we can. It's certainly a powerful message, one that apparently has deeply resonated with viewers. As far as I can tell, the fanbase has generally responded well to this new ending, some claiming this message is an evolution and newfound maturity to the original. And as nice as it all sounds, I just can't agree. The original message looked at reality, warts and all, and found deep, positive meaning in our interpersonal relationships in spite of all the inherent suffering it all can and most likely will bring. The new message, as I see it, focuses much less on coming to terms with the ugly parts of reality to move past it, but on interpreting it in a more positive light in order to do better by the world. It may sound like a subtle distinction, but it's a very relevant one. Now, there's nothing wrong with this message. It's certainly a nice and powerful one, but it just rubbed me the wrong way. After thinking long and hard on these few hours I spent digesting the movie and writing the script, the best description I can come up with is that this new take on Evangelion feels like a fairy tale version of its former iteration. it glosses over all the very ugly truths of human nature. Sure, in the Rebuild continuity, Shinji goes through a lot of shit, and that factors into his growth into a more optimistic worldview, just like in the original. But it doesn't really feel as personal. The terrible situations that knock him down before he gets up are more external, outlandish, and I would argue not all that relatable. The rest of the cast is either given little screen time or not at all developed to feel like their happy ending was earned through strife, but sorta given to them by a boy that decided selflessness was the true answer. Despite all the surrealism, when compared to the end of Evangelion, it all feels considerably sanitized. In going for the more optimistic and way more hopeful on humanity's best qualities route, to me, Thrice Upon a Time undermines the truly incredible message found in End of Evangelion. The original Evangelion posits that despite all the terrible shit we human beings endure due to our very nature, we can build and sustain something that is truly beautiful and worth living for, no matter how painful it is when we inevitably face all our issues and worst nightmares head on. The Rebuild of Evangelion posits that the source of our sorrows are in how we choose to engage with each other, and the ultimate answer in all our quests for happiness is to realize we must love selflessly. Both takes emphasize the importance of love, but in one, love is something we fight hard for, against all circumstances to create, sustain, and cherish it despite our unavoidable flaws as humans. In the other, love is a form of transcendence from our flaws into something nigh perfect, an ideal of selflessness that is able to inspire everyone to follow suit and make the world a better place. The original acknowledges and, to some extent, celebrates our imperfection as human beings as being the cause we can create something so beautiful as love in the first place. The new states that our flaws are something we ultimately should grow out of in pursuit of true, selfless love for others. To me, this isn't an example of a maturing worldview. It feels like what was once a more jaded, rooted in reality, but still hopeful worldview began to romanticize itself until it began to believe in fantastical and naive notions. Now, I'm not saying you're a hopeless dreamer if you like the end of Thrice Upon a Time. It's not a bad creed to live by at all, and all the more power to you if you were deeply moved by it. I also can't help but to feel happy for Anno. For someone that went through such a strong bout of depression as he did, for him to make art such as this implies he really has improved his mental health, and I assume he has found his share of happiness to keep on going, to the point where he boldly completely remade his most famous work from scratch. Heck, Eva was a source of deep resentment for him, and he turned it into something so positive. Who am I to take that away from him, or you? But I can't help but feel this new conclusion is a more sanitized, dreamy version of itself, to the point that it veers more into escapism territory than optimistic nihilism. And for that, I think it's a bit of a shame, really. The truth is, no matter how I feel about its canon status, this is clearly, indisputably, the true end of Evangelion. The imagery, the meta-narrative, and all interviews with Anno and such make it as clear as day, barring spin-offs and more ancillary content that's sure to come to tie up the many, many loose ends plot-wise until this continuity is completely explained like what happened to the original. This marks the absolute finale to the franchise, and that's the hill Evangelion has chosen to die on. The culmination of 26 years, Jesus, I'm so old, worth of storytelling is this one ending right here. So it's a shame many in the fanbase won't consider the end of Evangelion, and its original take on it, to be the true final message Evangelion is all about before it rides off into the sunset. I of course realize this is all just selfishness on my part. I want people to value the same things I did and experience Evangelion the same way I did. That's in no way fair or reasonable, and who's to say my interpretation of it is even right? For all we know, Anno could fume through his years with rage upon hearing my take on his work before succumbing to depression again as he realizes humanity is doomed to never get what he's all about. Well, I really went off the deep end there, didn't I? The point is that, to me, the end of Evangelion is not only the peak for the entire franchise, but also the one and only true ending of it. Whatever may come to solidify both continuities in a single timeline or something, I would still sorta reject Rebuild's ending. So yeah, I know this is silly, but I'm sorry for sorta rejecting your work, Ano-san, and allow me to give you my most sincere thank you. My life would be very different had it not been for Evangelion, and for that, I'll be forever grateful. No matter what. This is it. This is a new YouTube channel that I'm making right now. It's called Geek Out. I don't really know if I'll call myself by my real name or some sort of handle. I don't know how this will work. I think I'll just keep doing some video essays. I actually had another video on Persona that I've written before this one, but, I just watched the movie and I thought that I should, strike while the iron's hot. And that's it. I really don't know how to end this being the first video and all. I guess like and subscribe. Hopefully you will like any future videos I do. And that's it. Thank you very much. I'll see you later. Bye.